could be our student. A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. And for the second time this week, welcome to the Old Course at St Andrews. On Monday, the show came to you from the Roux Hotel, which is my annual home at the Alfred Dunhill Links Championships. Today, in what is a very new part of an otherwise fairly old and charming little town. This is the restaurant upstairs at the Road Hole Grill at the Old Course Hotel, which runs alongside the 17th, if you know your golf, the infamous Road Hole at the Old Course at St Andrews, while the golf plays out behind me on what is a ridiculously nice day in Scotland, particularly for late September. The focus, as always, is very much on wine. We kicked off on Monday with some of the South African wine that is on show this week and welcomed by everybody who gets to try some of South Africa's finest. We had Skulk Burger talking through his Valbeduct wine. We also chatted to Louis Straden from Ernie Els, and we had Hein Kuchlenberg from La Motte as we ran through all of their wine. Today, two very special guests who join me. They're also here at the Old Course Hotel in a nearby studio, and they are going to be sampling some wine from Waterford, some wine from Anthonij Rupert, and some wine from Ruston Freda. And I will introduce you to my two young, chiseled and good-looking guests in just a moment. It is beautiful here. It will not be tomorrow. It is supposed to be torrential, Florida-like weather in St Andrews, which is what we're a little more familiar with in Scotland. But for today, taking advantage of a gorgeous backdrop in a beautiful hotel to celebrate some exceptional South African wine. Before we do that, though, let's have a quick look at some of the latest wine news. Now, this is coming up this weekend. I would not swap the Alfred Dunhill Links Championships for anything, but this is one I am a little sorry to be missing out on. Sadly, they clash. It is the Nedbank Cape Winemakers Guild auction, where our collection of members of the Guild have each created two exceptional wines that go up on auction both on Friday and on Saturday. And you don't have to be there. If you are there at the Lord Charles down at Somerset West, it's not just terrific wine. They've got some super food and some lovely chefs who are going to be complimenting the wine through the course of those 2 days. But you can also join online, which is what I will be doing. Friday, 5 p.m. South African time, Saturday, 9 a.m. South African time. You'll remember a couple of weeks back, we had a number of the Guild members, including the Guild chair, Gordon Newton-Johnson, and his deputy, Sam O'Keefe, as they took us through a selection of their wines. There is some very special wine being made. It all goes towards the work that the Guild does, and it does such a terrific job in the winelands. If you'd like to both stock up on some very exclusive and very well-made wine, but also help out some terrific causes, then jump online if you're not there in person. The Nedbank Cape Winemakers Guild Auction 2022 in partnership with Strauss & Co., where you can register online, and that is Friday and Saturday. And this is a really cool development, the Black Cellar Club, which I'm actually a member of. I'm not entirely sure how, but I am. And it is a collection of young up-and-coming sommeliers, people in the wine industry, and helps to support and broaden the knowledge of a group of people who are doing sterling jobs across the wine industry. And that makes this really cool. A partnership with the Wine and Spirit Education Trust and the International Wine Education Centre. They're the people I did my WSET 2 with, and I'm currently doing my WSET 3. There's a group of them. You might recognize a couple of the Blind Ambition superstars, both Tanashi and Joseph, in that photo, as is Ian Manley, who does a great job coordinating for a very influential group of South African wine people. And there are now going to be scholarships for WSET 2 for members of this group who are unable to afford them themselves. So great educational opportunity. Well done to the Wine and Spirit Education Trust and Black for coming together there. Really, really good piece of news for the wine industry. And then I think this is the 13th of October. That would be Charles and Zelda Fox. 13th of October marks 10 years of Charles Fox. Charles, the Joburg businessman who tossed it all in, bought a fruit farm in Elgin and decided he wanted to make world-class bubbles, brings in a French champagne maker every year to oversee the process. That's all they make, bubbles, nothing else. And they do make it very well. That Cypher in particular, one of my favorite Cup Classiques. If you haven't tried Charles Fox, and stick it onto your list. Another great South African producer, and with a decade behind them, a really exciting milestone to celebrate. So congratulations, Charles and Zelda, who we've had on the show a couple of times before, and I'm sure we will have on again soon. All right, well, here we are sitting at St Andrews, where it has been a great day for the golfers. That weather is lovely, a little slow, the play here at the Old Course today. I bumped into Kelly Slater as I was coming into the hotel. He'd had a 6-hour round, and I actually got to film his final shot, which disappeared out of bounds right, but I promised him I wouldn't tell anybody about it, so please don't share it. What I will share with you is some excellent wine, because part 2 of our celebration of the wines at the Alfred Dunhill Links Championships brings us to the wines of Waterford, the wines of Ruston Freda, and most importantly, the wines of Anthonij Rupert, which is the house brand, so to speak, for St Andrews this week. And with me, 2 old friends of mine who are regulars here. They sacrifice an entire week to come and sit in Scotland and drink wine. They're fine young gentlemen. And they're my guests today from Waterford, Mark LaRue, and the global head of Antigo Red Blend, or something along those lines, Mr. Gareth Robertson. Guys, welcome. Lovely to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah.
And it's look, we just have to look over my shoulders. I think you guys have probably got a fairly similar view in your studio. It's not always weather like this, but whether it's blue skies bare or whether it's rain pouring down, it is a magical place to be, particularly during this week.
Yes, Daniel. Sorry, well, I thought you were being cut off there at the moment. But yeah, it's a fantastic week to be here. With all the international people coming. And participating in the different events, and for them to for us to showcase some of South Africa's best wines. So great occasion.
It certainly is, and it's one in which the wine gets to be shown to a very influential group of people. Mark, it's one you've come over to many times now. It's not the biggest group of people, but it's a pretty influential group when you look up and you're pouring wine on a Thursday or a Saturday night at the functions, and you catch a glimpse of some of the people who've come from different parts of the world, ostensibly to play golf, but as a happy offshoot to try some of your wine as well.
Yeah, no, it's great. Always, normally you see these people on TV, on professional sportsmen, and it's amazing to actually connect with them and chat with them in the flesh, and I think more proudly to show them some of South Africa's great wines from back home.
Bet you've been doing this for a while now. If we look back to when you first came over and you were introducing people to South African wine, have you noticed a marked change in how much people from other parts of the world understand and appreciate South African wine?
Yeah, definitely, Dan. I think over the years that I've been fortunate to be here and I'm showcasing the wines, there's definitely an appetite for the South African wines. Just going to some of the local restaurants that obviously in the area, I've also just seen more and more South African wines on their lists. And I definitely think people have definitely taken more liking to the wines, especially our exceptional top-end wines.
Which we are going to be drinking in just a moment. The wines that are on show, we tried some of them. If you watched the show on Monday, we've got more of them here. I get the sense, and it's probably an extension of the previous question, Bear, that there's now a real excitement each year from a lot of the repeat guests who want to know more about the wine and who want to see what your new releases are, because they've become quite familiar with the different brands that get showcased every year.
Yeah, definitely. I think this evening, we'll be showcasing some of the top end wines alongside with Mark. And it's interesting. I've definitely seen attending the event more and more people that are really passionate about wine. For instance, at dinner last night, a lot of guys were trying some of the top Bordeaux, but some Kanonkop snuck in there, and it was the star of the show. So it just goes to say that a lot of the people are really taking South Africa more seriously on that.
Of course, it is just part of the trips that both of you do. Mark, tell me about your build up to getting here to Scotland. You've been doing a little bit of travel. What's the reception been to the Waterford wine you've been showcasing over the last little while?
Yeah, I flew in early this morning. It was about a 3 o'clock start this morning from Ireland. I spent 3 days in the trade with our importers. And I think just to echo what Gareth said, our wines show really well back home. We know them well back home, but we need to let the international market taste these wines because there's so much excitement around them. And I think when you start pouring some South African wines and you start telling them the story from back home, I think they're very well received, right from sort of the white wines that we're showcasing right up until our iconic wines. I think there's a lot of enjoyment. There's a lot of excitement. I think the stories that come out of South Africa are really sort of heartfelt. So I think we're doing well. It's very exciting, but I think I need to say this as well. We do need to travel to show people the wine, otherwise the word will never get out.
And that is important, not just to show the wine generally, but to show a particular segment of the South African market. Some people watching might recall a show we did from Belfast earlier this year, where I'd gone into Tesco and I had got hold of a pile of South African wine, and we drank some pleasant enough wine, but it was all sitting in that kind of £7 to £11 market. And yes, there's certainly a place for that, but convincing people that South African wine can also belong in those upper price brackets, the kind of wines we're going to be drinking in just a moment. Is there more of an acceptance, are you finding, Mark, to that level of wine, that pedigree of wine at a higher price in Europe?
I think what's exciting coming out of South Africa with that level of wine is that South Africans are starting to understand what their identity is. And I think once we understand our identity, it becomes an easier story to tell. And I think it makes more sense to a consumer. We're not bouncing off other international top wine areas and playing off their story. We've actually come across and we have our own story that's unique, that's a story to listen to. And I think people are definitely buying into it. And we're showcasing the gem, which is our iconic wine. And it's by no means a cheap bottle of wine, but we put everything into it back home. And I think people feel that, and they do list it, and at great establishments, they're very excited to have it on their list, standing next to other very important wines from the world.
You guys are both two wonderful disciples of South African wine, spreading that gospel. Greg Sherwood is another. He's busy watching from London. Send my best regards to Skulk. It was great to catch up with him in London last week, where if you watched the show on Monday, Skulk recounted some time he'd spent with different people already in the UK. I bet you were off in Germany recently. Is it a similar experience to the one that Mark has just recounted in terms of how people are seeing South African wine broadly and more specifically accepting South Africa as having a rightful claim to the upper echelons of wine?
Yeah, I think the trip to Germany was really successful, and we did a 3-day roadshow with a number of other South African estates, from Boekenhoutkloof to Cederberg and Lamott. And it was great just pouring those wines amongst some of the international labels. There was definitely a great sort of energy around the South African tables, and very positivity. I think the big thing that I took out of the last week in the Netherlands and in Germany was the amount of value that South African wines offer. I think we definitely raised our game in the quality sort of side of things, and affordable prices and really, really good value. And that was generally a lot of good comments coming out that. I think in the German market, for me, it was interesting to find out that a lot of the people enjoyed the sparkling wines that we're making, and for what the price they're actually paying for it, compared to entry-level champagne or cava.
And with the price and scarcity of champagne, it's a good opportunity for South African Cup Classique. But it's generally a good opportunity for South African wine, and especially this week. Is there a little bit of pressure, though, Bear, when you know that you can look up and, there's Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, or there's Tico Torres, the drummer of Bon Jovi. These are people who can buy any wine they want, who are used to drinking the very best, and you've now got to dazzle them this week with South Africa's finest.
Yeah, there's always a bit of a nervousness, but I think that I'm very confident, and I think of showcasing all the South African wines that we have here today, because they are really some of the best, and I don't think we have to stand back for some of the other ones that they're used to drinking back in their homelands.
All right, well, let's get into the first of those wines, because I've worked up something of a thirst 15 minutes into our show. And the first of them is in the hands of Mark. And actually, together with the Antigo Red Blend, 2 of the 4 wines that featured on the very first episode of Dan Really Likes Wine back in November 2016. It's very much a premium icon of South African wine. Mark, introduce the gem, the story behind it, and what allowed you to settle on this particular blend.
Yeah, so the gem, it's a fantastic wine. I think it's a story that really got me attracted to Waterford in the first place from a winemaking point of view. Jeremy Orr, the owner, bought a piece of land in Stellenbosch in the Blauwklippen Valley, which is previously known for more fruit farm or fruit area. The vineyards that were on the property weren't in great shape, and sort of Kevin Arnold, the winemaker that Jeremy joined as a partner, had to recreate this piece of land. I think it was a great opportunity with a lot of experience, and I think a great following behind him that would follow him with whichever wine he makes. Gave him a great opportunity to really look at the land very carefully and iron out the different segments, and actually plant varietals that he'd come across in a lot of his traveling in his career. A lot of influence from the Mediterranean. But I mean, broadly speaking, Waterford soil is created for Cabernet. So the gem is a blend of 8 different varietals dominated by Cabernet. So the idea and the concept is really to create an impression of the farm through the different soil types, through the different sort of vegetation and the diversity that we have on the farm. So we're registered as an estate, so we very proudly grow our own grapes, make our own wine, and bottle our own wine on the property. And the gem is sort of the purest reflection of our piece of land. And we try and make the best. We try and make something that's uniquely South African.
One of the criticisms I've had in recent years of some of the South African chefs is trying to do too much with their food. There are 100 different flavors when there could be 10 quite happily. And I think we've seen a lot of the better chefs move back to simplicity. How do you strike a balance between wanting to show everything we do and yet not kind of, I suppose, losing the individual grapes in the mass of everything to come together? How difficult is that art?
Yeah, it is challenging, but I think being in Waterford for 13 years, I've sort of figured out a rhythm. I really look at the gem actually as a core wine of Cabernet. I don't look at it as a blend of 8 different varietals. I really look at the base cab that we've got and really the perfect sort of backbone that we can have for the wine. And then it's really, instead of being overcomplicated, really seasoning the Cabernet in a sense, like you mentioned, a chef would do. So it's not to create other dominating flavors, but it's really just to fill in the gaps, layer the wine. So I do look at it as a cab dominated wine rather than an 8-way blend.
Now, this show is nothing if not professional, and so last night I did some research. Bear and I had dinner together, and one of the wines that we tried was that gem. Before we jump into your wine, Gareth, what do you make of gem? What makes it stand out for you?
Yeah, I think tasting it last night, and I chatted to Mark earlier. Initially, you had those wafts of classic sort of Helderberg cab characters coming through on the front, and as we left it open, there was a secondary sort of amazing sort of, I think, some of the other varieties coming through. It opened up and was the 2015, had amazing fruit and was delicious. So yeah, couldn't fault it at any point.
It also benefits, I suppose, Mark, from its particular vintage, because 2015 was such a special year. It's a year that I think initially everybody thought was going to be the great year of the decade. 2017 is now laying a similar claim as it makes its way to the summit. That particular year was so good for so many wines. Is that the case with this? Was it a vintage that for the gem you felt really stood out?
Yeah, I think looking back, maybe at the time of the 2015 release, I thought it was a spectacular wine. I thought it was great. I maybe didn't label it as the best ever, But I think as the wine is growing a little bit of age, and the more and more we taste it and benchmarking it with many other gems, I do think it's one of the gems that are standing on top. I think the fact that 2015 was an outstanding Cabernet vintage specifically, and that is the backbone of the gem. So it's difficult to fault the gem when the main component is just such a standout.
And a standout as a South African flagship, because Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon is as successful an export as we have had. So this, I presume, gives you the advantage this week here at the Dunhill Links, generally as you're traveling through Europe, of showcasing a wine that doesn't just speak to something you guys do particularly well, but also carries the hallmark of one of South Africa's very best styles.
Yeah, Cabernet is, I think, very important. As I sort of mentioned earlier, I think we really need a message coming out of South Africa that's understandable. And I think Cabernet is one of those messages that comes out of Stellenbosch. You know, it's always quite difficult in Stellenbosch with all the mountain ranges, the close proximity to the ocean. There's a lot of ocean breeze influence depending on where you're sitting and which slope you're sitting on. So to try and get a single message is always tricky. I think there are a lot of great South African wines, but coming out with a single message as Cabernet, I think is very exciting. The Cabernet Collective, I think, is really doing a fantastic job at sort of creating a message to take overseas that's relatively simple and understandable, and gives us sort of a starting point to start negotiating in a way.
And that is what makes the gem one of the highlights of this week from a wine drinking perspective. It does have some rather fierce competition, though, because Gareth has got a rather nice wine that will be sitting alongside, particularly this evening with our wine tasting. It is the Antigo Rupert blend. Ahead of a discussion on the wine itself, a reference for those people for whom the history of the Antigo Rupert brand is perhaps not so familiar. Remind them, if you will, Gareth, who Antigo Rupert was and how the brand has taken shape.
Yeah, Dan, the late Anthony Rupert was Johan Rupert's brother, and he was always involved in the wine business, based in Franschhoek at the farm Lomera, and was the founder of Rupert and Rothschild brand, the partnership between the Rothschild family. And the Rupert family have had the property since 1969, so there's a lot of legacy there, and it's always been producing wine for over 300 years. Sadly, in 2001, the late Anthony Rupert passed away, and Johan Rupert took over and dedicated it to his brother. And with dedicating to his brother, he decided we want to make some of South Africa's best wines. So we had the original Lomera property in Franschhoek, which was replanted and planted with a lot of Bordeaux varieties and some other varieties, but really suited up onto the slopes of the mountains. And then the Rupert family acquired some properties in Rubeck's Rivier, Ultima up in Elandskloof, and a property in Darling, which the late Anthony also had started. So I think there's a huge focus on that. The blend is our sort of pinnacle and our icon wine, but which is exciting is that the Optima has been made, Anthony Rupert Optima, since the 1983. So, and Cabernet and Merlot have done extremely well on the property, and this is the one that I think showcases our vineyard the best.
You mentioned the Optima. I consistently think it's one of South Africa's best value wines, for the sheer quality and the price. And in fact, I've had it over dinner a number of times with Johan, who likes it in particular. Tell me a bit about his input, because here's somebody who runs this massive company, travels the world, and yet somehow still seems to have the time to keep a close eye on the wine side of the business, which is a fairly small part of a much bigger business, and also keep you on your toes as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, we extremely blessed of working there and with Johan's input, and having a proprietor that is so passionate about the wine business, not only our business, but the whole South African wine business. And his investment to the Old Vine Project, to our Cape Good Hope range, and also just some new technology. He's a fantastic person who puts input into trying new methods of trellising, to new sort of machinery that we use in the cellar, and also his input, obviously from an international point of view of what wine people are enjoying, from a taste profile and that. So yeah, I know he's an extremely busy man, but he always finds the time to really pay a lot of attention, and we're extremely lucky to have that.
All right. Well, the wine is being showcased today on the show by that category-leading blend. What is in the blend, Gareth, and what's the story behind it?
Yeah, so it's a Bordeaux-style blend, 40% Cabernet, 40% Cabernet Franc, and 20% Merlot. I think for me, it's from the 2013 vintage, which was a great vintage from our side. And what is more exciting, that the vintages to come are really great, the 15, the 17, and more recently as well. Davy Boot, a winemaker, has done a great job in producing this wine. So it really we pick the certain blocks for the Antigo Red Blend, and then we select barrels. It goes through quite a strict regime of how we're starting to blend it and what vineyards work best. But I think what I really stands out in our wines coming from the Franschhoek property, Lomora, is the Cabernet Franc. I think Cabernet Franc in the Franschhoek Valley does extremely well. Even if you come over the Halswörter from Dalet to Rainbow's End to Zorgvliet to a number of these other Oldenburg, and then you come around the side Boschendal down into the valley, Cabernet Franc does well. It's maybe not as green and as astringent as some of the Stellenbosch Cab Francs, but it's really a nice sort of backbone, and I think we get a bit of generosity in the mid palate, a nice fruit. And I think Davy works his magic in the cellar by just really managing the tannins. I think it's one of his attributes of really, I call it tannin management, but about the softness, but also a bit of seriousness in the wine. So yeah, classic Bordeaux style wine. And yeah, I think it's definitely our future, and Bordeaux varieties do very well in Franschhoek.
The Cabernet Sauvignon drives your blend, Mark. For me, it's the Cabernet Franc in this that's the star attraction. In fact, the single varietal Cabernet Franc out of Anthony Rupert, I also absolutely love. Sadly, so do my family, which means it doesn't tend to last very long whenever I get my hands on some. You've had a glass or two there. What's your take on Gareth's wine here?
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very well put together. And I think the Cabernet Franc is definitely doing a fantastic job. It really uplifts the aromatics, adds a little bit of perfuminess to it. I like sort of the chalky dustiness that it adds without creating cloyingness on the palate. So as Gareth also says, there's a lot of generosity, of richness in that wine without being overcomplicated. So I think there's great purity, which obviously presents itself through Franschhoek. Franschhoek is slightly cooler than Stellenbosch, not as sort of robust and graphite-y. So I think there's elegance in a wine that can be taken pretty seriously.
It's also wine that's just had a little bit more time to gather before being unleashed upon the world. One of the advantages you have, Gareth, is that extra cellar time, that extra bottle time to really allow the wine to get to its best before we start drinking it.
Definitely, Dan. We're very fortunate with our proprietor that believes in that, and which I also believe in that, of releasing our wines when they're ready to drink and still got legs to go for many years. So yeah, so we always release our wines from, for instance, our Optima, which is our entry level into the Anthony Rupert stable of wines, is 4 years before we release it. And with the blends and the single variety Cab Franc and Cabernet, it's anything from 5 to 6 years before we actually put it onto the market. I firmly believe the wines are a lot more well married. They're showing some of their sort of bents, but also they've got showing structure that they are going to last. And I think the proof is in the pudding. If you open the older vintages, they definitely last. And yeah, so we're very lucky on that point of view.
Well, if you're looking on screen, you might just have spotted 3 bottles of wine sitting on camera. We've only tried 2 of them. There is, of course, a third. Sadly, we don't have Jean Engelbrecht from Rustenfrieda. He's just finishing his third lunch of the day. And so we're going to have to drink some wine on his behalf. And Gareth, this is wine that you know particularly well from just generally drinking it, but also because you've been showcasing Jean's wine here for some time now.
Yeah, I don't know, Dan. It's a really a special estate in Stellenbosch, and definitely has been flying the flag for South Africa for many years. I think from when Kevin was involved there, you know, the first estate blend of blending Shiraz and Cab, and they've really stuck to it. You know, the 1694 is their flagship, and it's a delicious wine. I think what I really like about it is the Shiraz is about 59%, so it's quite a big chunk of that. And Shiraz being one of my favorite varieties, gives it like an amazing fruit. But I think what Jean has really done and his team is about the refinement in the wines. They're nice and big, but they're not over the top, and they're well structured and extremely well polished. So yeah, I think from Ristenfreda, amazing estates, and year after year they're just producing great wines.
Mark, smile on your face. I saw there when you had a mouthful of the 1694 a second ago. What makes this wine stand out?
Yeah, a little different to the other two because we've got Shiraz that's dominating. As Gareth also said, it definitely lifts the fruit profile, a lot more sort of floral violet aromatics on this wine. It is slightly younger, so the tannins are still a little bit clawing, but we are sitting on the Helderberg. So the soils of the Helderberg do add a little bit more graphite, a little bit more hardiness, a little bit more rusticness to the wine. But I do agree as well. I think Ristenfreda has always been extremely well known. They've always sort of been a benchmark for us in the wine industry. Every time you're having a tasting, you've generally got a Ristenfreda in the lineup to see how you're progressing. But I think what I'm most impressed about the Ristenfreda these days is they've probably just toned down a little bit in sort of austerity and sort of just brought a little bit more purity and refinement into their wines, which has made their wines, I think, a lot more classical and really stand out in Stellenbosch.
They've also got a range, Mark, not dissimilarly to Ernie Else, who we chatted about with Louis Stradham on Monday, the Wines of Ernie on show here this week, where they've decided this is what we're good at, and so this is what we're going to do. With Ristenfreda, it's just a small selection of red. Only they've got a rosé in, but it's mostly Cabernet Sauvignon, a few offshoots. Two examples of what I think we're starting to see a little bit more of in South Africa, where at one point, if there was a varietal that could be made, every estate tried to make it just to make sure they had an example sitting in the tasting room. That's been cut down by a lot of people. And there seems to be a bit more precision, a bit more focus in terms of what the offering will be. Yes, we can do something good, but if we can't do it really well, then let's set it aside and focus on those areas where we do excel.
Yeah, true. The one-stop shop, I think, is a thing of the past. You know, there's so many great wines, but we also realize with competition, you need to stand on top. You need to be the best, and to do that, you need to showcase that you're being specific. You need to show that you putting all your focus and energy into sort of a more one-direction approach. And I think the Helderberg is that area that you need to be doing Cabernet or singing the Cabernet song as much as possible, because it is the best terroir, so to speak, for Cabernet. Shiraz also does well on the Helderberg as well. But I mean, we red wine dominated, so it's really great to see estates putting sort of their mind down to more simplicity and putting more focus onto single varietals that perform well, and trying to fine tune and really try and nitpick at what really creates a better Cabernet the following vintage.
I think it's a terrific showcase of South African wine at its top end, and the people drinking it here at the Alfred Dunhill Links Championship. I was very fortunate to have this selection of wine. It's not quite as broad a selection as there's been in the past, though, Bear, because I'm sure this will be amongst your highlights of the year. A rather well-known American actor who used to stand next to you pouring some of his wine over the years.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's not playing this year, so we don't have the privilege of getting to taste his final wine. But yeah, I think it's really special to know that only South African wines are being showcased at that, and it's just really special that what Johan Rupert does for the industry of just showcasing these great wines. And I think once it's liquid on the lips, once people have tasted these wines, they tend to order them more in restaurants or wherever they are, or start investing in them.
The winemaker in question is, of course, Kyle MacLachlan from Desperate Housewives, a show which both Mark and Gareth have watched every single episode of, in some cases twice. He's not here, neither is his wine, but there are loads of others, and they're being drunk by some pretty big stars. What's been for you, Gareth, the most starstruck moment over the years? You're pouring some wine, you look up and you realize, oh my goodness, what's been the one for you?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, but I think the biggest kick for me is really about pouring our wines and seeing so many of these stars enjoying them. I don't think there's one that you can really single out, but I think we're in for quite a treat tonight because chatting to a lot of the players that are here and the celebrities, of all of them saying, are we doing this wine tasting tonight? What are you showing? What is new? What other wines are out there? And that for me is extremely special. And I suppose gives me the kick to come back again.
All right, a wonderfully avoided answer to the question there, Gareth. Trying not to embarrass himself. I'll bank on Mark being a little more honest here. What's your starstruck moment? Who's the person you poured wine for and you've immediately sent a furious WhatsApp off to all your mates?
Dan, I think there's an incredible lineup of people that do come to the Dunhill, and it's really exciting to see that they take a little bit of time out of their very busy schedules to come and enjoy, I suppose, a little bit more private time on the golf course and taste our wines. I'll probably have to go back to one of my earlier Dunhills, and I think meeting Sean Fitzpatrick was, I suppose, one of those moments for me. He came up to the table and he was genuinely interested about the wine and so modest, and he actually introduced himself to me and I told him it was unnecessary. But I mean, pouring for someone like that's created and achieved so much in his career, to be so humble and really try and be a novice at asking questions towards me about wine was quite incredible.
Sean, of course, a wine lover himself and does quite a lot of work with Mud Island, the Kiwi wine brand on Waiheke Island, just off the coast of Auckland. One of the many, many guests who have been here and who've sampled South African wine. And by extension, you'd like to think, guys, then go away as being ambassadors for South African wine. So if we take that as one of the many reasons for pouring all of this fantastic wine, what, Gareth, do you hope people are taking back to wherever they've come from as their message about South African wine, as their understanding of where our wine has got to today?
I think, Dan, like you alluded to it earlier, you went to some of the, let's say, the UK supermarkets where a lot of South African wine is priced from £6 to £11. And it's not wrong. A lot of people's perception is in that sort of price point. I think what is special, and we hope people take back, is actually we're looking at more serious wines that we make. Over the years, seeing the quality increasing, and for them to go back and say, wow, actually, the Anthony Rupert Opta is fantastic value for what you get in a Bordeaux style blend. And if you compare it at a price point, it really over delivers.
And echo that, Mark. Is there anything else you feel you'd really like people to come away with understanding about South African wine after a week like this?
Yeah, I think coming to a tournament like this for 3 days, I think a lot of people go home and they'll never forget it. It's such an amazing memory, such an amazing tournament, and I think the wine forms part of that memory, and I hope that we can assist with solidifying that memory through the wine. If the wine was bad, I think people would remember that it wasn't such a great experience in the evenings at the dinners or at the lunches. So I think the fact that they go home with a really great memory, I think the wines that they tasted, and they know that they're all South African wines, and I think we're very privileged to only have South African wines at the tournament, that is a take-home message for a lot of the guests and the players that are here.
And they'll be taking home some of the wine, if anything is to go by. There are one or two rock stars I've definitely seen walking out the door of the evening with a couple of bottles in hand, very happily. Possibly these, possibly others, which leads me to a question about some of the other wine. Mark, there is, I believe, something fairly new that's come out from Waterford to add to your range.
Yes, you're right, Dan. Times are changing, and I think, us as a brand, we are still growing at Waterford. I think we've got lots to do, and I think it's also about solidifying our message around Cabernet and around red wine. So we've recently launched a new Bordeaux-style wine driven by Cabernet grown on red clay soils, which is quite new for us at Waterford. Most of our soil is more rocky and grey and loam-like. But this little section of red clay develops a Cabernet that's a little bit more fruit-forward, has a softer tannin structure, and we decided to maintain this softer style of Cabernet and introduce, I suppose, a new generation or a younger generation to start drinking Cabernet, and that it's not just for investors, it's not just for serious pennies. So it's a wine that can get people into enjoying wine, appreciating it, and hopefully one day when they do strike it lucky that they're buying the wines that we see in front of us today.
As that summary of the latest steps from Waterford comes through, I'm looking down over my shoulder, and there's Ronan Keating and Tom Chaplin of the band Keen playing together, walking down the 17th fairway. Superstars everywhere. Ronan, a big fan of wine. Tom doesn't drink at all, but Ronan does love his South African wine, as he loves South Africa. He's not the only one who loves South African wine. There are many here this week. They'll be trying all sorts of different wines. Is there anything new and exciting on the list from Anthonij Rupert, Gareth?
I think our latest is basically the Longmont Private Cuvée, which we launched recently. There's definitely some projects on the go, which I think we'll announce in the months to come. It's been a project that we've been building on since 2015. So there's definitely something in the pipeline.
Well, what is the relationship like between yourself from a marketing perspective and Davy and the winemaking team in terms of calling the shots and nudging wine in a certain direction and seeing kind of what one wants to make versus what the other wants to see made?
I think we've got a really special setup. We've got a newly appointed managing director, Carl Chapman. And we've got a great team, I think, from our production to sales and marketing. And we meet bi-weekly. We discuss the wines. We plan ahead. We taste beyond borders. So we're tasting other wines from other wineries and really keeping it in. So I must say it's obviously the winemaker's final call. But we often discuss it and what, from our side, my input from a marketing and sales point of view. And ultimately, it's a joint goal of trying to produce the best that we can. So, it's a great structure that we have, and we're very privileged.
The wine is going down very quickly through the course of this week as people get to enjoy it and they get to see where South African wine is at the moment. What about the future, Mark? We've alluded to it in part of to where South African wine has got to up to this point today. You've been traveling as Gareth over the last little while. Lots of success stories, I think, at the moment from South African wine. But where do we still need to do a little better? Where is there room to improve, room to grow, room to make more of a statement about South African wine and its potential to be more than it is at the moment?
Yeah, tough question, Dan. I think we're all trying to answer that at this point. I don't think it's an easy task. But I do think South Africa needs to put more wine in bottle and send it overseas and really spread the story. There's a lot of passion and loyalty back home towards wine, so there's a lot of room to grow. I think back home as well, and we do see wines going into new markets back home, seeing a younger generation enjoying wine as well. It's not just the more senior population. So I think that's very exciting. It's great to see tourism come back to South Africa again. Haven't seen tourists in South Africa for quite a long time, so it's good to see the numbers visiting the farm go up. So I think that's also a starting point. We're such a beautiful country, and to get people coming to South Africa makes our job a lot easier, so that we can just stick a glass of wine in front of them and then the rest hopefully sorts itself out.
And by extension for that, in terms of the wine that you're producing, you've spoken about the Antigo, and in fact I see Greg Sherwood mentioning it there. I loved the Antigo Red Blend when I reviewed it recently, says Greg from London. The style of wine that both the market is leaning towards, but also that conditions are perhaps dictating as we become ever more conscious of the environment and our impact on it. Is that likely in the case of Waterford to have much of an impact on the style of wine you produce and the way that you're producing wine over the coming years?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's also making our message clearer. I think we understanding our wines better, we're understanding our soil, so we're making wines that differ every year according to our vintage. But I think because we can explain the differences in our wine and we know where they're coming from, makes it a lot more understandable from the consumer. And I think in the end, by making wine alongside nature, we are creating better quality wines. Our wines are going to be different going through quite a severe drought. You know, if you're having quite a cool vintage, it's going to affect the wines. And I think you need to be accepting towards that and just react in a very sort of positive way and not trying to create a similar style to last year, which might have come from a warmer vintage. So I think there is the understanding of wine, making better wine is very important. But I mean, also listening to Gareth's answer now with the marketing team, I think it's very important also to understand your consumer. And you need a few wines in your portfolio that need to be a little bit more open ear to what the consumers are saying and what they are looking for, because in the end, that is your door kicker into your brand and getting them to taste something that's really iconic, like these wines in front of us, which are, I think, purely made on production and winemaking decisions to make the best wines possible. And that's the excitement.
Are you getting more feedback, particularly from the European market or other international markets, people wanting to know what your approach is to wine from an environmental perspective, how green you are, how careful you are about producing wine, Gareth, that has as little impact as possible on the environment?
No, definitely. I think it's definitely increasing. You know, I was recently in Switzerland, but it's from all different parts around the world, and people are wanting to do the right thing. You know, we made a decision a number of years ago to go lighter weight bottles. You know, we have the Pro Tier range, which is really about sustainable sort of reusing the bottles and the way we do a lot of things in the vineyard. So for sure, I think there's a huge drive for that. You know, we're already putting plans in place of our energy, how we use our energy, water, how we're saving that, and trying to do the best thing for the environment and also for our vineyards and brand. You know, so yeah, definitely, I think there's a lot more pressure on that coming from the European market, and there's also a lot of interest from our wines vegan friendly. You know, so that's also another debatable sort of subject, but there is a lot of pressure from that as well.
The multifaceted challenges of making wine, and yet still, especially in the case of both gentlemen today, pulling it off rather effortlessly and delivering some wonderful wine to us. Last question for each of you, and I haven't prepped you with this question, and deliberately so, because I want a nice authentic answer. We love sharing the love on Dan Really Likes Wine, speaking to the broader South African wine picture. Kicking off with you, Mark, give us a wine in the last month or two, a South African wine that you've had, one that people might not have heard of or come across, that you felt just delivered something really special for you.
Gee, Jen, that really puts me on the spot, because the last tasting I remember was mostly internationals. But I think the very recent wine that I tasted is something from Cabernet. So it's a young winemaker, Donnie Stadler, which actually worked at Waterford a little bit before my time. He's a little bit older than me, my senior. And I think he's really making a great change to that brand. He's coming up with really exciting wines. They've created a new Bordeaux blend as well, but I think he's made a Cinsault, which is particularly interesting, and from the Stellenbosch region, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But I mean, I think it's more just a brand that's revitalizing itself, bringing itself up, and really doing well currently.
Donnie Stadler, wonderful young winemaker, South African record holder for sheer number of braais he has in any given year. And in fact, he actually looks pretty much like a braai in his declining years. Wonderful winemaker, wonderful wine, some terrific Chenin as well. Look out then for that Cabernet Cinsault, gets the mark of approval from Mr. Roux. What about you, Gareth? What's a South African wine that's caught your attention of late?
Yeah, obviously Cabernet Franc is really well known and stuff, but it was actually I'm tasting an older vintage from 2002, and also a '98 Rupert and Rothschild Baron Edmund It's their first one they made. And what was really nice about it is tasting these older wines and see how well they've aged and how they've lasted in that. And that really, gives you, really a big kick that we're onto something really great. So yeah, those two are two of my favorites that I tasted recently.
So a modern Cinsault, a grape that's enjoying a wonderful revival in South Africa, and some old school Canon Cop that gives us a reminder of just how well South African wine can age. I think that's a great combination, guys, and reflects really nicely on the diversity of our South African wine. Guys, thank you both. Really appreciate the time, really appreciate the wine. I know you've got a busy evening tonight, lots of excited people looking forward to tasting the best of South Africa, which you shall provide. And do so brilliantly as always. So thank you for being part of the show. Thanks for being part of the week. Thanks for sharing some great wine on the show.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for the opportunity.
There we go. Mark Leroux at Waterford and Gareth Robertson at Anthonij Rupert on a lovely, lovely day in Scotland. It will not be a lovely day tomorrow. It's going to bucket down, so we're making the most of the conditions today. I think I'm going to go for a very gentle and rather slow walk down the 18th fairway and catch the end of some of the golf, and then this evening drink some more great South African wine. That wraps us up for this evening, but it does start to prepare us for next week, where we are going to be broadcasting live each day from Cape Wine, which starts next Wednesday as the wine world dials into the Cape and focuses on what is the biggest South African wine celebration of the year. Last one was 4 years ago, so a long overdue return, and one which has the wine world very excited, me amongst them. Thank you for watching the show this evening. Thank you very much to the Old Course Hotel for hosting us, and Natasha Taylor, Global Head of Luxury Events at Richemont, for helping us out as well. I will see you back next week. For now, enjoy your weekend and keep drinking South African wine. This is Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay, live from the Alfred Dunhill Links Championships. Goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.